Anakin Skywalker was known for his immense potential in the Force, but during his duel against Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar, he had not yet reached his full power. His training was accelerated due to Palpatine's manipulations, and he never had the chance to fully exploit his abilities. This immaturity in the Force led to him being beaten by his former master, leaving him in a vulnerable position, physically and spiritually. Anakin was an unfinished weapon, and his defeat was largely the result of his own impetuosity and lack of control, not a limitation in the Force. When Anakin lost his limbs and was confined to the armor imposed by Palpatine, his connection to the Force was drastically affected. The technology that was supposed to save his life imprisoned him, limiting his movements and physical abilities. Although he was still a powerful Sith Lord, the armor restricted his mobility and made him dependent on external devices such as a respirator. From that point on, Anakin, now Darth Vader, came to see his body as an obstacle, a limited shell corroded by hatred and pain. After his humiliating defeat on the planet Mapuzo for the second time, as shown in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, Vader realized that he had to overcome the physical weaknesses of his armor. His breathing was a vulnerable point, easily exploited by enemies like Obi-Wan. This led him to consider improvements to his suit, something that would increase his endurance and power, rather than relying on the old limitations imposed by Palpatine. The defeat on Mapuzo was a turning point, forcing Vader to look for ways to transcend the barriers that held him back. Knowing that the technology in his suit was insufficient, Vader decided to turn to the advanced knowledge of the Mandalorians. These warlike people were known for their almost indestructible armor and superior combat technologies. By combining Mandalorian technology with his own connection to the dark side of the Force, he hoped to create a suit that would not only protect him, but also eliminate his vulnerabilities. It was a drastic solution, but a necessary one for anyone who aspired to become the most powerful being in the galaxy. The Mandalorians, however, were notoriously independent and proud. They would never easily bow to a Sith Lord, especially one associated with Palpatine, who had exploited their culture in the past. The history of conflicts between the Sith and the Mandalorians had generated a mutual distrust. For Vader, the idea of negotiating an alliance or even buying technology was inconceivable. They would need to be subdued, and he knew he couldn't get the Emperor's attention by mobilizing an army on Mandalore. Vader therefore devised an infiltration plan by leading a small team into Mandalore. Instead of a direct attack, he opted for a stealthy approach, eliminating Mandalorian guards and warriors as necessary. This allowed him to advance without alerting the Empire to his intentions. The mission was clear: to acquire new armor without attracting the Emperor's attention. Brute force would only be used when necessary, and Vader was more than willing to face any resistance. On his journey, Vader eliminated several Mandalorians who opposed him, showing his supremacy with the lightsaber and the power of the Force. However, he spared the lives of two talented Mandalorians, known for their armor-forging skills, by forcing them to create a suit to his specifications. They were obliged to collaborate or their lives would also be snuffed out. This was the essence of Vader's rule. He didn't need the Mandalorians' loyalty, only their skills. The Mandalorian craftsman set about creating a bespoke suit of armor for Vader, adapted to his needs and combat style. The new armor would be much more than protection. It would be a symbol of power and dominance. Unlike the armor imposed by Palpatine, this new version was designed to improve his mobility and increase his control over the Force during combat. It represented the rebirth of Vader, a fusion of Mandalorian technology and Sith power. After weeks of adjustments and tests, Vader finally got his new armor. Physically, he was stronger than ever, his stamina increased, but his connection to the Force had not changed drastically. His discomfort with his breath didn't change much either. The armor didn't amplify his power in the Force directly, but his enhanced physical capabilities made him a much greater threat in combat. He now possessed almost superhuman physical strength and was almost indestructible, but he still carried the weight of his connection to the dark side. Over time, Vader noticed that the physical improvement brought about by the new armor reduced his wear and tear. He was able to fight for longer with less fatigue, which began to have a positive influence on his general health. And with better physical health, his connection with the Force began to intensify again. As someone born of the Force, his high amount of midichlorians made his body regenerate faster and faster. As his connection to the Force strengthened, Vader began to experiment with new abilities, including the use of Force lightning, something he was previously unable to do due to the limitations of his old suit. Now, equipped with the new armor, he was finally able to channel this destructive energy, making him even more dangerous. The ability to cast Force lightning solidified his position as the most powerful being in the galaxy, surpassing even many of the greatest Sith Lords in history. As his power grew, Vader began to distrust the Emperor more and more. He knew that Palpatine had deliberately weakened his abilities by imprisoning him in a limited suit. This betrayal began to fuel a growing anger within Vader, which connected him even more deeply with the dark side. Every day, he became more convinced that his master was deliberately keeping him in check, preventing him from reaching his true potential. Vader's anger culminated in an incident during a meeting with the Empire's admirals. One of the officers openly mocked the Force's abilities, underestimating its power, which made Vader explode in rage. He strangled the officer with the Force until he broke his neck, making it clear that any disrespect for the Force would be punishable by death. The Grand Admiral's rebuke only served to increase his anger even further, turning the meeting into a massacre. Vader, in an act of pure fury, closed all the doors to the meeting room using the Force with a simple wave of his hand, preventing any escape. One by one, he executed all the officers present using only the Force. He made a point of not drawing his lightsaber, demonstrating that the Force alone was enough to subdue any enemy. This act was not just a display of power, but a declaration that he would no longer accept being underestimated or disrespected. When Vader's rage finally calmed down, he realized that he had crossed an irreversible threshold. He had eliminated the entire Imperial High Command, destroying the military leadership in a single act of revenge. There was no turning back. He knew he was heading for an inevitable confrontation with the Emperor. The decision to confront his master had already been made, and his thirst for power and revenge drove him ever onwards. Determined to confront the Emperor, Vader went to him, who greeted him with suspicion, already aware of recent events. Vader, overwhelmed by his accumulated fury, drew his lightsaber and lunged at Palpatine. He knew this battle would be decisive, and Palpatine, aware of the limitations of Vader's armor, believed he could win. However, something unexpected occurred during the confrontation. During the fight, Vader felt a disturbance in the Force, something he had never experienced before. He realized that his new armor, far from being a limitation, had enhanced his abilities to unimaginable levels. With impressive agility and strength, he began to dominate Palpatine. For a moment, he allowed himself to be hit by the Emperor, just to show that he had overcome the limitations the Emperor had imposed on his suit, but that he had overcome them. Palpatine, left with no alternative, resorted to Force Lightning, his last card. However, Vader, in an astonishing feat, mastered the ray bursts with the palm of his hand, similar to what Yoda did against Dooku. With a mastery never seen before, he threw the beams back with even more force, knocking the Emperor away. It was a new level of power, one that Palpatine had never anticipated. Vader, approaching Palpatine, coldly declared that the Emperor's time was up, as was Darth Plague's. With a final wave of his hand, Vader used the Force to lift Palpatine into the air and, in one merciless movement, threw him to the ground with such force that the sound of bones crashing to the floor echoed through the room. The Emperor, once the most powerful being in the galaxy, lay defeated, his body inert in front of the man he himself had shaped and imprisoned. The cycle of power and betrayal that characterized the Sith had reached its apex with Vader's victory over his master. After sitting for a while looking at what remained of Palpatine, Vader got up and left the Imperial Hall, now knowing that it was his, to inform everyone who the new Emperor was and ready to subjugate anyone who dared question his authority. Vader ordered Palpatine to be placed in a kind of suit that looked more like a prison, leaving him exposed, suspended at the entrance to the Imperial Hall with tubes connected to his body, keeping him alive but slightly sedated. This was the punishment imposed by Vader on the greatest emperor the galaxy had ever seen. Until then. However, as the Force became more and more present, Vader began to feel a small spark of something new. It wasn't the dark side that was calling him, but a distant memory of what he had once been. Anakin Skywalker. It was as if Anakin was still alive, but outside of him, still living on Tatooine.